I am Jeff Ado. This is Lunacy, where we discern the sacred from the insane and admit that whether we like it or not, we are all profoundly affected by the cycles of the moon. How? Nice one. That was quality. That was thumbs up. That was a very good howl. My guest today is Roxanne Ruby. She is a teacher. She's a Mary Magdalene aficionado. She's a leader of this work. She's a beautiful spirit and soul, and I'm super happy to have you on the program. Thanks for being with me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Is there anything I left out here in your intro? Is there anything else you want me to say about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good start. I'm
Okay.
sure so much will be revealed as we open this conversation and allow the threads to weave themselves through us. I do love to share stories, so I'll be sharing story as we go. You'll get to know me better that way.
Beautiful. Yeah. That's one of the things I love most about doing this podcast is like it's such a great way to get to know people. It's like you drop in with somebody for 60, 90 minutes, whatever it is, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I know a lot about this person, even if they're talking about other things, you know? So
Right.
that's
Well,
great.
and you're going right into the heart of quality conversation, opening up big topics, and there's no small talk. So it's nice to be able to dive into the depth with people in that way and feel their spirit.
Yeah. Well said. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. So let's start off with, one of the reasons that I brought you on the program is, you're friends with my wife. She did the Watchtower, and you are a big proponent, a big leader. I want to say like a revivalist of the spirit of Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
And I know she met you at Watchtower, which is like an event that I believe you host.
Yeah.
And so maybe we could just start off sort of talking about that. If you want to like backtrack a little bit into like how it is that you got into Mary Magdalene in the first place and what the fascination there, how that story began, how it is that she, reached out to you, if she called you on the phone or knocked on your door or something like that or whatever, how'd that
Yeah,
go?
definitely something like that. Well, first of all, just addressing Watchtower and this event where I got to meet your lovely wife. We gathered together for the first one in Los Angeles last November. We just did another one in the Nevada City area in June. And they are immersions of Magdalens. They're a gathering of the Magdalens, 4 days fully immersed in rituals and ceremony and study of not just Mary Magdalene, but the lineage of the Marys, and bringing together over 40 women to be in the temple together, learning and sharing with one another our stories and what we've gathered along the way. And yeah, it's a really special, beautiful event that was sparked from a long time vision that I've shared with my collaborator and business partner in this endeavor, Rose Hartsong, which her and I have been dreaming for many years of creating a docu-series and using the platform of film to tell a story of what it is to create a relationship with Mary Magdalene. We both have deep and long paths with the Magdalene, and we have this common inspiration to be able to share the gifts that have arrived in our lives through that communion with others. And so we were thinking to do that through film. And you know how it can be when you have an idea for a creative project, and sometimes the idea is just like staying in the idea state and it's not actually coming down into the material plane. We've been talking about this
Yeah.
film for like 3 years, and last year we were sharing that, man, we just need to gather women and get together in the physical form and bring cameras and make art and do ritual and see what happens. And so we did that, and your wifey was there, and it was really just such a profound experience and just deeply beautiful. And we were in ceremony for 4 days from start to finish. It's a constant prayer. And then in a very strategic way, we were bringing in the cameras to be able to see what story was telling itself through us. And we got to go over the footage afterwards, and we did the same thing in June, even more refined. And the story that is emerging is essentially this 8-part documentary series that takes us on a journey of following the path or the pilgrimage of Mary Magdalene in her life and her teachings. And it's not so much like a factual, like this is Mary and this is, everything finite of who she was and what she represented, but just the intuitive process of connecting to her spirit, sharing that story of what unfolds and the transformation that occurs within each of us and our sisterhood as we go through this journey. Yeah. So that's the Watchtower.
Wow.
And if you want to,
that's
ask
super
any more
inspiring.
questions. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How many dudes were there? Like how many guys were at the thing?
Not any dudes yet. The eventual
No dudes.
plan is to no. That is an important
because
part
I
of
wanted
the
to go.
work.
I told my wife, I was like, I really
all the king codes that you're bringing through, like this is part of the work. I was listening to the last episode that you just dropped, referencing the mother wound and the dynamics between men and women and what it is for us to step up as kings and queens, sovereign beings in relationship with one another. And that's very much a huge part of the teachings of the Magdalene. And so I believe it's in the not too distant future that we're going to be rolling out another iteration of this that isn't just primarily focused on the feminine side of it, but bringing in all genders and having that opportunity to alchemize together with our men, because it's very important to do this work side by side.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I was obviously I was making a joke there because and the reason for the joke is that like I really want to honor you and acknowledge you for creating such a sacred container for women, to study spirituality and like delve into the power that women have as spiritual leaders and priestesses and like that. That's so missing in our society, and I just really want to honor you and thank you for like bringing my wife into that mix also, because she's a super powerful woman, as I'm sure you know. But it's just really beautiful. So I think it's really cool. Go women, I say. All right.
Go women, absolutely. And I mean, what you're talking about is exactly the reason why I'm on this path. Ever since I was a little girl, I've been super curious about like where are the women at? Like where are the women in our major systems of leadership and governance and religious power? We're living in a world that's primarily being governed and run by men. And I remember just feeling like so confused about that, even as a young girl. And I became very curious about seeking significant female leaders, specifically within the spiritual spaces, and then also like politics and governance. But I am a very spiritual being myself. My spirituality is really like the foundation of my existence. And yeah, I just was looking for who are the women that have been acting as leaders within that space. And there's definitely this wave right now of so many epic women stepping up and stepping into their leadership and service, because leadership eventually is just such a form of devotion and service. And yeah, I find that Mary is a great example for me personally of what that leadership can look like. And I think she's also inspiring many, many other women and men during these times of creating a new way of stewarding society that is more loving and compassionate.
Bingo. Yes, exactly. Beautiful. That's great. Yeah, I'm a man, And
Yes, you
I
are.
there's no I feel frankly fortunate that like I'm good with that, you know. Um, but but as a kid, I also often wondered that. My mother's a very powerful human being and very compassionate person, and I grew up going to church with her and just like not really getting. It was always like I remember learning in school about, oh yeah, women just got the right to vote in 1920. What? You know, and why are there no women leaders? It just didn't really like when I was growing up, right in the 80s. We were still very much in a very male dominated culture. I mean, we still
Yeah, I
are,
mean,
but
we
you
still
see more
are.
of the
Yeah.
rise of women.
Yeah,
There's,
exactly. It's
you've
happening.
got, yeah, Hillary ran for president, Kamala's running for president. There's other
Right.
women that are taking leadership roles. There's other societies in which you see women taking more leadership and how well that's actually working. By the way, go men too. This isn't about women
Yeah,
over men. It's just like there needs
totally.
to be a balance. Like I'm
Yeah, I'm very
not
glad you're
people
bringing that up.
confuse yeah, people confuse feminism with thinking that women are better than men. No, that's so stupid. Like it's just
Right.
we have our
Well,
own
and there's
attributes.
different expressions of feminism. Like I think that as my girlfriend explains it, she says, and she has her degree in women's gender studies, and so she was really immersed in this world, and she talks about how there's like these three waves of feminism, and how in the first wave there was like a pendulum swing. Like we were so much in what is commonly referred to as like the patriarchy, which I don't
Hmm.
believe that the issue is that we have so many men in positions of power. I think the issue is that we have so many uninitiated men in positions of
Exactly.
power. We basically have a bunch
That
of
is
little
exactly right.
boys with their pains bodies fully online that are not
Yes.
healing, and that is the distortion that is creating so much chaos in our world today. Like we need the men in positions of leadership, but we
Hmm.
need them to be integrated and healed, and showing up as kings, how you said, so that's part of the work of the Magdalene, is to be able to not just, like, that first wave of femininity was the pendulum swing, like we're going to take our power, and stand up to this injustice. But it has evolved over time where now there's a seat at the table for everyone. And part of this work of feminine leadership is also stewardship of how to be able to create a round table where all different perspectives and voices and genders and ages are welcomed, so that we can exist again as a healthy organism. Because right now humanity is like we have like a disease of war and sickness and enslavement, and we need to heal as a collective. And so that's really the work here, is this feminine rising is really like another way of stewarding coming forward. And just thinking about the name of this podcast and lunacy, and that it's a full moon, waning full moon, Aquarius full moon that we're just coming out of, which is all about communication and the rebel and innovation and creating new systems. And just while you were talking, it made me think about, like, the qualities of this more, what you could say, feminine leadership, but I also like to think of it as more just like wholesome, holistic, um, that it works with nature,
Hmm.
because we, as feminine beings, we have this very innate connection to a cyclical existence like
Hmm.
nature, whereas
Hmm.
male bodied beings have a more solar existence, and they work within like a 24-hour clock, and just that yang energy operates in a different way. Whereas when we can give the feminine essence a seat again, it brings us back into our humanity, because it reconnects us to the cycles of nature, and reminds us that we are nature, we are expressions of nature. And
Hmm.
there's a wax and a wane, and there's ebbs and there's flows, and we are, I believe, divinely designed to be in harmony with this creation. But there's been
Mhm.
like a great forgetting that has taken place that has gotten us very far from that possibility.
Yes. Whether we like it or not, we are all profoundly affected by the cycles of the moon. So accurate,
Exactly.
so true. I mean, they're
Yeah,
tides. Life itself would not exist without the moon. You know, they have concluded
exactly.
this day. The
Unless the moon
scientists.
is maybe like a satellite that somebody put up there, and whatever conspiracy
Yep.
you want to
Captain
believe
Crunch
in.
is
But
back there,
I
man.
really feel the
Aliens.
connection. Yeah.
Aliens are back there. There's aliens back there, all right, and they want to eat our faces. Just kidding. I don't know. Maybe there are. Who knows? I don't really care. Uh, um, yeah. To your point, there were a lot of really great things that you said there. You know, it's a misnomer to say that we live in a patriarchy or that we've lived in a patriarchy. We've lived in a
Yeah.
poorarchy. A poorarchy
Yes,
is a
exactly.
is a is run by boys. It is Lord of the Flies, literally.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
actually that. It's a bunch of, I mean, boys running things
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
who are profoundly wounded and greedy
Wounded
for
boys. Yeah.
power and money and etc. And it's like, I mean, you don't have to dig that deep to see it. I don't just mean in like our political culture, because maybe we're a tiny bit better at hiding things. If you look around the world
Kind of.
at different cultures, different governments, and look to see how much embezzlement goes on, how much corruption exists that is super easily provable, it's astonishing. And then
Yeah.
that's part of this whole global network of economics, etc. Which again, I'm not saying we should burn all of that down. I don't think that at all. I just think we need to run it
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I think, to your point, like, we need initiated men who are actively seeking initiation so that they can fully embrace their king-like energy. And that king-like energy is really compassionate and benevolent and,
Yeah.
peaceful, and helping people to
Yeah.
resolve their issues and give them love, which is very much also the feminine energy, is very compassionate and loving and life-giving. And so, like, you know
Exactly.
it, that's really what we need. And so what I think is really interesting, and this is a good bridge to get into Mary, is like, she was all about that life. And
Yeah.
and the union between her and Jesus is
Mhm.
profound. And first of all, I mean, she was a prostitute. Everybody knows that she was a prostitute, because, like, Jesus, our Lord and Savior, he wanted to hang out with hookers. You know what I mean? He was all about it. He's like, hey, where are the hookers at? Let me see if I can find one, and then just spend most of my time with her, because go hookers. Everybody, Christians love hookers. All people love
He was an
hookers. Hookers are
edgy
the best,
one.
man. Prostitutes are great. Yeah, he was super edgy, man. He was doing some BDSM stuff with Mary. I don't know. It's like, I can't even it's I was looking at one of your Instagram posts that kind of pointed to the history of all of that, right? And it was like,
Mhm.
I'm gonna quote you. um it was 591, right? Pope Gregory was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, she was a prostitute.
Yeah.
um you can find at 591 because he confused her with somebody else that was mentioned in the Bible. Can we just
Yeah.
dig in a little bit to, like, let's get into this history here? How did Mary Magdalene become a whore? And by the way, sorry, before we get into this,
Yeah.
let me just be clear about prostitution in general. I don't have any problem with it. I think the sex industry is like a thing that exists for a reason, and it's because we
Okay.
are very backwards about sex, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of, like, sacred history using sex to achieve higher states of consciousness that we've forgotten about and don't
Exactly.
utilize anymore.
Yep.
And so it has a place in our society. And so if you or friends of yours are sex workers, or you've seen, like, don't, this isn't about guilting and shaming people who are in that line of work. Love to all.
Yeah.
And Mary was not a prostitute. So,
Right. And though the direction that you're going in is important. In a minute, I'll get into like the history and how the rumor started and everything. But in my own understanding of Mary as an initiated priestess, and not just Mary Magdalene, but also to Mother Mary and this lineage of women that stewarded these sacred rites of passage, that supported the initiation of the masculine, right? Without Mary, we
Mm-hmm.
would have no Christ, right? Like
Yeah.
Christ is the anointed one. Mary is the one that carried the anointing rites with her sacred oils. And through the anointing, that's where the divination happened, where he was divinized and made divine. And that practice is still done today, right before our eyes, with the Queen of England being anointed in order to step into her seat as,
Hmm.
unfortunately, a very, you know, evil source of feminine power in the planet. But still, like, there's one woman that is holding a seat of power. And when she was made queen, it was back when live broadcasting was just being made available. And the one part of her whole ritual of the queen making that was not allowed to be televised was the anointing, because it was too sacred to broadcast on such a scale. And so even in our modern culture, we see how these ancient rites and rituals are still practiced. And there's I liked how you called me a revivalist, because there's a revival and a reclamation happening to use these mystery teachings to be able to liberate and uplift and empower and bring beauty and love, instead of how they have been used in a twisted way, which is to create power over, right? So
Mm-hmm.
just, that's kind of a little
Yes.
tangent, but
A good tangent. A super
yeah,
important tangent.
thank you. But yeah, just where were we going before I went off on that tangent?
Pope Gregory, which offends
Pope
me
Gregory,
because
right?
my
Okay,
dad's
so
name was
wait,
Greg.
but
So
first, let me talk about the sex industry, because this is important.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
as you said, like, there is a place for this. And I do
Right.
believe that part of the initiations of the lineage of Marys and these priestesses that were working in the temples to help bring enlightenment to humanity, that for certain ones, the sexual arts were a huge part of their work. And
Yeah.
this might be an edgy idea for many people, but I do believe that Yeshua, Jesus, the Christ, and Mary Magdalene were doing these high, holy, tantric practices to be able to activate each other's light body and step into their potential as spiritual leaders, changing the world for millennia, through their union, right? And so I do think it's important that when we open the word of Mary Magdalene, we also bring in this idea of reclaiming sexuality and sex work as a gateway for empowerment. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm a student of this. Like, I have so much to learn. However, the little bit that I have tapped into with tantra and even with kink, sex is 1000% a gateway towards healing, transformation. I mean, obviously we experience that in our personal relationships, hopefully, but
Mm-hmm.
it really is a form of therapy. And we're talking about these uninitiated men that are ruling the planet. I firmly believe that in the right context, initiated sexual priestesses could help to transform that consciousness. Um, so, we can go down that rabbit hole,
Kinky.
but
Yeah.
yeah. uh,
I used to joke that, like, if you don't believe in God, go have an orgasm. Like,
mhm,
I mean,
exactly.
I'm not trying to tell everybody to go jerk off and please wait till after the program is complete, or pause it, whatever. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, like, if you doubt the experience of an orgasm, um, obviously, like, really, I think brings us into a sacred union with God on some
Yeah,
level. And the more that we see
yeah,
that and open ourselves up to that idea, the more that it becomes a beautiful practice. And it is literally the act that gives life to us and to
literally,
our
yeah,
offspring.
right.
So, there's
And it
something
gets
like
us into the
it's
infinite nothingness. Like, it connects us
mhm.
to our divine power as creators.
Yeah, it's the one thing, like, that we can undoubtedly say that is a holy act, and we don't treat it that way, which is so
No.
just twisted and bizarre. I don't get it.
Well,
Like, that's
I
the
mean,
one
this
thing
is,
that brought you into
yeah,
existence, and you're just
exactly.
gonna, totally. whatever,
Yeah.
objectify it and mistreat it
Right. We'll
and
talk
mistreat
about
women and men
yeah.
and
It's an
mm-hmm,
existential wound, like you mentioned,
mm-hmm,
the very thing that brought us into existence, and more or less what everybody is, seeking out for the rest of their existence,
yeah,
is either objectified or made into sin. Right.
mm-hmm,
And so
exactly,
that's part of too the reclamation and the revival that must happen, is bringing the reverence back to our sexuality as undoubtedly sacred. um, and so anyway, to go
yeah,
back to some of the historical facts, it's interesting, that this story got twisted, because while I do think that Mary Magdalene was working as an initiated priestess and using the sexual arts to help in Christ's ministry and that movement, and she brought her own entire body of teachings forward. There was, we're basically dealing with a situation of telephone here over hundreds of years, and translation of languages, right? Like the original scripts were written in Coptic for the Bible, and they have been rewritten over 500 years by the point that Pope Gregory gets his Easter sermon, gives his Easter sermon, and there's another unnamed woman in the Bible that is declared as a prostitute. Mary is never specifically quoted to be a prostitute, but he basically combined these two women and dubbed Mary Magdalene, the prostitute from the Bible, even though she's mentioned in many other places in the Bible, clearly with a very significant role in the story of Yeshua, most likely as his wife, because there's certain things that she did that are in the Bible that just make no sense considering the religion of Judaism. It doesn't make any sense that someone besides his wife would be there doing the burial rites for him. She was the first person that he revealed himself to upon his resurrection, which, all of this also could just be metaphorical talk. I don't know that actually there was like a human Jesus and a human Mary. This is a story that has been told and retold, and very well could just be a cosmovision that is being held together by our culture. Yet, even within that cosmovision, it feels like there's only one part of the story being told and a large part of the story being mistold. Because what Pope Gregory did on that day that he gave this sermon, he made the heroine of the story, who represented the fertile, holy mother, not the virgin, but the life-giving priestess who stewarded this path with Yeshua. He made her into the whore. And what that did was it created this dystopia for the feminine, because either we get compartmentalized as the virgin or the whore.
mm-hmm,
And there's so much in between there to be valued. And and because of that, the story of Christianity has made it so that the luscious, fertile, pregnant woman who has been well loved by her consort and is about to give life, or the bleeding woman who's in her dark feminine and is more interior and in the shadow. Both of those archetypes have been like cast aside as like evil or dirty. And it's really
mm-hmm.
like how you mentioned too, like sex has been the very thing that makes us alive, has been demonized. It's like
Yeah,
the very portal with which we all come through. The holy sacred yoni vagina portal has been turned into something dirty and dark and evil, and like, don't talk about it. It's just crazy when it's the thing that
it's
connects us
really insane.
all.
Mm-hmm.
So Pope Gregory gave this sermon, a lot of confusion, basically 1,500 years of gossip, of this rumor that started and then just kept repeating. Still today, most people you ask will answer in a similar way of, who's Mary Magdalene? She's the prostitute that hung out with Jesus, you know?
Yeah,
but there's so much more to the
It
story.
makes
And
no
the Catholic
sense.
Church has actually reclaimed it. The Catholic Church took that away, took that title away from her, sainted her, gave her a feast day on July 22nd, and
Yeah.
publicly declared that like this was a miscommunication. Sorry. But it's like, you know, the reputation is already out there. And so that's our work, is to set the record straight.
Yeah, which that's really fascinating to me. I mean, go
Mm-hmm.
Pope Francis, right? And Pope Paul, I guess it was in 69. He was like, "Oh, that's not
Mm-hmm.
true," right? And then
Yeah.
Pope Francis
Yeah.
was like, "Let's make her a saint because she
Yeah.
was." The Catholic leaders of the tradition who spread the rumor in the first place have recanted the statement that she was a prostitute and made her into a
Yeah.
saint, which should all
Yeah.
give kind of everyone pause,
Mm.
particularly since she was with Jesus, that now she's a saint. Then,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that like that role automatically should be much more valued and important.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, there's a gospel of Mary Magdalene, right?
Yeah. Right. And that was only recently discovered. Yeah. And then it's taken time. I mean, even when it was discovered, it was lost and there was a flood and it hasn't all been found. I think there's 3 different copies that have been found, all of them incomplete. So it's interesting when we look at, you know, not just the cycles of the moon, but these greater cycles of the cosmos that we are manifestations of. You know, we're just expressions of these way bigger beings that are within the universe that are moving. And it feels like whatever geometry that we're in right now, this particular cosmic alignment in time, is bringing this story forward. You know, because
Mm-hmm.
it was only 60 years ago that it was recounted from the Catholic Church, you know, after
Yeah.
almost 2,000 years of that misinformation. And only so recently did the gospel become available to us. And so it's almost like this story that was hidden for so long, there's like a max capacity, there's like a tipping point in our consciousness and the cosmic geometry that is allowing for the emergence of this story to come through and to bring all of the medicine that it has to offer us.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I wonder if do you know if
Truly.
the Catholics are like, yeah, that's a good gospel? They probably haven't. That's not in the King James version.
I don't
But I
know.
wonder what the
Yeah.
recognition of that
It's a
is.
journey.
Anyway, to be continued. They made her a
Yeah.
saint. Good job. Way to go, Pope.
Good job. Yeah,
Um,
we're grateful. We're grateful, you know, and it feels like we're doing, you know, I don't know. What I would say is what I feels like right now is that in so many ways we're in this imaginal moment in time where, you know, there's these major religions, major societal structures, stories, essentially stories that have shaped our reality, that have been told over time. And now we're like dissolving. And I believe that where we're going and what we're becoming individually and collectively is like we can't even imagine the butterfly that we're meant to be. You know, right
mhm.
now we're just kind of in the dissolving state, which can be so scary, but it's also beautiful because through that we cluster together and we form these new cells and we remember together these new stories and we rewrite the narratives and we get to emerge as something more brilliant than we could ever imagine. And I think that's the process that
Mhm.
we're in right now.
Yeah, I believe so as well.
I'd
And
like to believe so.
um, I'm not cynical because that's cynicism is the enemy as far as I'm concerned. Um, and I wish that these type of conversations were more widespread. And I think also what we're seeing is a profound yearning in people, especially young people, for
Yeah.
deeper meaning and understanding of what's really going on, and maybe greater awareness of the grand illusion that's sort of being pulled in front of our eyes. Which, by the way, to me, maybe there's a grand conspiracy. Maybe there's a big, evil shadow, you know, emperor, like the emperor in Star Wars. Maybe that guy's hanging out somewhere. I don't know. I don't know if that guy exists. What I do know is like fear cells. We all have fear. And so it makes sense to me that, the fear-based operating system runs the world. The reason the news is
Yeah.
on a 24-hour news cycle and it's mostly negative is because people watch that. They get engaged
Yeah.
and they're locked in, and they want to stay in that sympathetic nervous system fight or flight mode and just be, locked into that. It sells. Unfortunately, like, we revel in the wound. We revel in the wound, and we just kind of stay there instead of looking at, well, why is it that we're feeling that way, and like, what's the source of it, and really like uncovering, looking deeper at how each of us is responsible for that wounding.
Yeah, but we are. I mean, look at this conversation, like
We are. That's true.
we have been essentially imprisoned, like, there's been a long cycle of humanity being imprisoned by our own ignorance,
Hmm.
and fear, for sure. And we're in exciting times because these are the
Hmm.
conversations that are being had. Yeah, I just want to
Yeah.
celebrate the fact that we are actively, through each conversation like this that we have, we're reimagining possibilities for how to be human. And being a mother of a
Yes.
2-year-old son, like, I'm just so excited because I see what I'm doing, and I see projects like this Lunacy podcast and other things that are, like, percolating this new possibility and giving a pathway forward. And then the next generation coming in gets to stand on our shoulders, and I just feel so excited for where they're going to take it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm with you. Let's go. Let's go, humanity. We got this. You know what I mean? Let's get out of the fear and into the love.
Sometimes I get cynical, I got to be honest, but I try to choose hope consistently because I'm like, well, I mean, may as well. Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard not to. It's just important to recognize, like, is that what's, because if for me anyway, if I let the cynicism win, then I become resigned and I'm like, there's no point.
Yeah.
And then it just shuts me down. And then I am also made impotent by the fear itself if I
Right.
succumb
Exactly.
to the cynicism. And so I can't really afford to do it on a larger level for my own creative purpose and like doing the work that I'm here to do. Like, I can't sit there. And also, like, I mean, things start small. And there are way more conversations about this. Things like
Yeah.
psychedelics are becoming much more, prominent, which open a lot of doors for people in a positive way. And they're getting a lot
Exactly.
more, clinical and mainstream accolades as a means of helping with
Yeah.
PTSD. Well, why is that? Maybe it's because it connects you to God. I mean, I'm just saying, all
Exactly.
right?
And
It
right,
gives you a
they're being
personal
legalized, and
experience.
the medicines are moving in ways that we have not seen, and because the interconnectedness of our modern world, it's really fascinating that this is another sign of the times, similarly to
Hmm.
how the spirit of Mary Magdalene is arriving right now. There's also this presence of the medicines coming online and psychedelics informing our collective consciousness in ways that maybe it never has in the history of humanity.
Yeah.
So, that's exciting.
Yeah. Super exciting. I just want to come back to, because prior, in part of this conversation, we're talking about moving out of this era. It feels like eons of
Yeah.
enslavement,
Yeah.
where there was a very long time where women were literally property and couldn't vote
Mm-hmm.
or have a say in things, which is just so, I don't even get it. Society. I mean, I get it on, like, I often try to think, well, what if this is all part of the plan, the divine plan, the grand plan of humanity? Was that allowed to be like that for so long? And on the other side of that, I'm like, well, technology really flourished and we got all these great things that we can utilize that allow us to communicate more readily, et cetera. That probably, in part out of a male dominated culture. Now, if women were also exalted, would that also be possible? I think so. I don't know. I don't totally get why there was such an incredibly dark period for women for so long, other than, men are stronger physically, innately, and able to dominate women. but that's just gross. That just means that like we lost our way in terms of like initiating ourselves and like honoring the feminine and going through the processes that make us men and that make us women. Like that just means that we lost all of these ancient traditions, and or just certain cultures didn't have them to begin with. But like, you look at a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
mean, but we
indigenous
did
cultures and tribal
though.
cultures, they
Yeah.
they had
We did
that,
have it to begin with. Yeah,
we
we've
did.
had that for sure. Like the
Yeah, and we
origins
lost
of
it.
culture were matriarchal, but matriarchal is not a specific flip, an exact flip of the patriarchy. It's like it doesn't mean that it's all these women that are ruling over and not uplifting and empowering. Like it's a completely
Right.
different way of governance. And yeah, I mean, this is just such a deep conversation, but I think that you said something that, the one word that I think kind of summarizes it all is fear. you know,
Mm-hmm.
is that there has been this manifestation of fear that has created the distortion that we're seeing play out now. And from what I understand, because I've been really curious about the origins of this fear, or Watiko is a name for the mind virus of this hungry
Watiko.
beast, yeah, that lives inside the subconscious that starts to control the manifested actions. And one possible source of this was actually the advent of agriculture. And when our human societies started to settle and stopped being nomadic hunter gatherers and started to farm and hold land. And while that was obviously a huge step in evolution, and it's a beautiful way, like growing a garden is a beautiful way of connecting with nature, but it's also one of the most disturbing practices of our times. Industrial agriculture is brutal, and it is enslaving our mother, our soil, Mother Earth, Pachamama, the one who is the mother to all. And I think that there's an important reflection there between the enslavement of women and the enslavement of our planet, and how they have kind of gone hand in hand. Because what happens when we were these matriarchal nomadic societies, there was a trust and there was a collaboration between humanity and nature. And when we started to enslave nature and settle and have agriculture, we enslaved the soil, we enslaved tools, we enslaved animals, and then the governance was passed on through the patriarchal line. So the power was given to the firstborn son, the name was given to the firstborn son, and it became this dynamic of the men owning the land and owning the women. And that's really where like this distortion started to happen, because I think we lost our trust in nature and we started to have this power over, rather than a shared power and a supreme gratitude for what is provided for us by both nature and the woman. And it just got really dizzy essentially. And I don't think that there's like a Darth Maul, or ruling over the world, or whoever the bad guy is from Star Wars. Yeah, that's the one. That is, controlling all of this. More so, I think it's just like a mentality. And I really think it's just a dizziness that has manifested over generations that is rooted in fear. And that's our work, is to restore that relationship within ourselves and our relationship to nature and how we come into relation with each other. It all comes down, I think, to relationship and how we steward our relationship.
Yeah, and really investigate our relationships and how it is that we behave in the world. And on this program, I really like to talk about the love operating system. Which is really just like having a background question, a contextual question of like, how do I love more? How do I love more in my life? Sometimes I'm good at this, and sometimes I'm not good at it. When I'm talking about it, I'm good at it because I'm bringing it into my consciousness. When I'm triggered and I'm like whatever, then that's tough for me, right? So that's one of
Oh
the
my
bridges that
God.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
cross. But like investigating that question, how do I love more? How do I come from love more? How do I experience love more? How do I give more love? How do I receive more love? Like that's something that's really works against, the fear-based operating system, and also recognizing that we're governed by fear so much. We're governed by pain so much that we're not, unfortunately, like, man, there's so many people that I wish I could just like click the forgiveness button on,
Yeah.
and like have them forgive and like open up to love, but I can't.
Mm.
No one can. The only person who can heal me is me, and the only person who
Yeah.
can heal you is you. And that's the sad, unfortunate truth of it all. But it's also beautiful, because then that's like each of our own hero's journey to discover who we really are underneath, and like own our shit, and really like own our ship, and like be sovereign, and like let
Yeah.
go of the fear and all the things. Because so many of these, like Christine and I were recently talking about how, so much of this fear is just floating around, man. It's in the atmosphere. You go down the street and all of a sudden it's globbed onto this like energy of like fear, and you're all of a sudden
Totally.
you're
It's
like, why am I in a
contagious.
bad mood? I don't understand why I'm in a
Yeah.
bad mood. It's because
Yeah.
it's just out there. And so
Yeah.
if I'm constantly cleaning myself and investigating, where is
Yeah.
this coming from and why am I like this, and doing practices that are helpful, like meditation, or doing that. For me, I do this Dao Bao, every day, or chanting, or like, whatever, going and putting your feet in the soil, laying down on the planet, doing some gardening,
Yeah.
like being a mentor to somebody, raising a
Yeah.
child, like
Yeah.
consciously. These are things that we can do to combat that, what is ruling, which is fear. Fear is still winning wholeheartedly, unfortunately.
But like you said, and this brings back the message of Mary, Rose, my business partner, she says that if you could summarize the teachings of Mary Magdalene, it's the sacred return to love. And the question that she's
Yeah.
given me and us that are studying with her to live into is, how can you return to love? And I
Right.
appreciate what you said about, like, yeah, when I'm teaching about it, I've got it down intellectually, but I'm still fiery and I have my triggers, and I am in this relationship that just makes me crazy sometimes. But I have this arrow, this compass that brings me
What's
back
that
to,
like?
like, okay, what's the sacred return to love? How can I return to love in this moment? And oh my God, it's so hard because the ego is thick and
Yeah.
deeply rooted. It's insidious, but we got to make friends with the ego. Like, we can't kill the ego. It is here to keep us alive and well, but we can alchemize it, and we can learn that, like, ooh, okay, moment of self-awareness. I am triggered right now, and I'm going to ask for us to slow down and return to love. And how can I be that? And so I'm constantly learning from Mary how to return to love, especially when it's hard. That's when it matters, because it's great to be all love and light when things are great, but when they're not, that's where the work is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I feel you. And I think also, like, I mean, in case this isn't abundantly obvious, like all of this conversation and discussion is really about like being active searchers of the truth and of being in love.
Yeah.
And you know, humility is key. Like
Yeah.
I am humble about it, because I am humbled by where, first of all, I'm humbled by the whole nature of existence and the mystery that we are a part of, and like what really, like, that I even have some semblance of an idea of what's going on, which I don't really, except I know what feels right in my heart, you know.
Yeah.
Uh
Yeah.
and then also just, the if you're listening, I am very much on the hunt with you, and obviously so are you, Roxy. So
Yeah,
um
we're hunted,
but to bring
hunting
it
and
back
being
to,
hunted.
yes, exactly. Exactly. That's right. I was thinking yesterday, I was like, um if you're not actively hunting the darkness within yourself, then that darkness is hunting you, and it hunts you by haunting you. You know, it hunts you by
Right. And
haunting you, where you're just
it's
like
like
stuck with
the
this
quote
nonsense.
of, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. These are the cards that we were dealt. I hate that. It's like, fuck you. I deal the cards, man. I am the card dealer, man. I am the big ass gambler. You know what I mean? I mean, there's a
All
bigger
in.
ass gambler up there, but like you know what I mean? They're my cards. I claim the cards. Okay, so to bring it back to
Yeah.
the Mary Magdalene thing, and the horror thing, which I think we've kind of poked a lot of holes in. I did want to say, like, in fairness, like, I was brought up Christian. You know, I still consider myself a Christian, though I'm not exclusive about it. You know, um, like the idea that Jesus was said that the only way to get to heaven is through me is, I just think that's ridiculous. He
Yeah.
may have meant the only way to experience heaven on earth is to be like me, to see like me, to act like me, to be fully compassionate for all beings and see the interconnectedness of all life,
Yeah.
and to like serve that cause rather than our own selfish, greedy, wounded misunderstanding about life. You know, serve God, serve Creator, serve Source. He might have meant that, and that's what I think he meant wholeheartedly. That's what I believe. And you know, as a Christian, it never made sense to me that Mary Magdalene was a whore. Like, you know, it just doesn't make any sense at all. And so, given the light of this, like what you're talking about, like maybe you could paint more of a picture of us of like what Mary's role actually was, and also like, you know, what are some of the teachings that she has to offer us? Like, how did she interrelate to Jesus, and like, you know, what is this mystery that we're discovering now that's helpful to us in our modern day lives?
Mm-hmm. Well, we can start with the Bible. That even though it's
The
a book,
Bible.
yeah, yeah, it's a good reference. Even though it's a terrible reference, it's also a good reference because that's the common story, right? It's the most printed book on earth right now, so it's a very
Yeah.
significant story. And as I mentioned, the stories that we tell shape the reality that we live in. So we can say that the most prolific story on planet Earth right now is the Bible and the stories that this book contains, many of which are metaphors and many of which are twisted because they've been translated so many times from their original text, which already that was, you know, written and rewritten. And then there was the Council of Nicaea, where a group of men got together and decided what the final product would be and selected a portion of the story that now goes into our conventional Bible book. But what has survived regarding Mary Magdalene, what has survived in that mainstream version of the Bible is her presence at some very specific and important moments in the life of the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the moment of the anointing, which I referenced already, where Christ actually means anointed one. She did that sacred ritual of bringing the divine into the human flesh through using these sacred oils to anoint him as Christ, right? So already massive, you know, huge part of the story. Then
Yeah.
we have the crucifixion, where she was the only apostle that was there the whole time. She was at his feet the entire time, supporting, sustaining. You know, he's going through this major initiation rites of passage. Like, how I understand the crucifixion is it wasn't just a political act to take care of this rebel and get him dead. It was actually an initiation of him doing the Osirian rites, which come from ancient Egypt. And I believe that Christ and Mary and their party, this group of people that they held around them, that were the Essenes, which is its own spiritual practice. And they're essentially cultivating angelic consciousness within themselves. And I believe that Mary and Yeshua were Essene practitioners. And
Hmm.
that part of the lineage of their study was the Kemetic mystery teachings from ancient Egypt. And that the story of Isis and Osiris, which is a story that reflects, once again, we talk about nature and the blossom and bloom, as well as the decay and the decomposition and this important cycle of life. The initiation process of Osiris, into the underworld to then emerge enlightened is the initiation that Yeshua was going through. And Mary was, as an initiated priestess, she was the skillful one to be able to facilitate his journey through the underworld to then come back enlightened. And so they were essentially playing out a way more ancient story, a very similar story that includes immaculate conception and, this beautiful love between the masculine and feminine, and the resurrection rites. And so Mary was there supporting him at the foot of the cross, obviously a very intense rite of passage. And then she was also the one that was there at the burial. There's three Marys that are mentioned in the Bible, and Mary Magdalene, it makes sense that she was his wife because in the tradition of Judaism, a rabbi is traditionally married. And Jesus in the Bible is referenced to as a rabbi. And so, based on the culture, it is reasonable to guess that he would have a wife, that he wasn't this, celibate monk, that he was a married man. And that Mary Magdalene was the one that was there to perform the rites that a wife would traditionally perform for her husband. And then, the climax of the whole story is his resurrection. And this is, a fully divine being, ascended master that has passed through the underworld, re-emerged, resurrected. And the first person that he chooses to reveal himself to is Mary Magdalene. So there's just these four major pillar moments within the story that prove the significance of her role. Now, while it shows her role as a follower and a supporter of Jesus, that doesn't necessarily include the teachings that she herself brought forward. And this is why we're so fortunate to now have access to the Gospel of Mary, which includes, still it's only a portion because much of it hasn't been found yet, but it starts to go more in depth into her teachings, which was all about the alchemizing of the ego and the sacred return to love, and this idea that we are fully human and fully divine, and to be able to uplift and glorify both sides of ourselves. Whereas right now, humanity has, that story of Yeshua being this perfect being, and only through him we can enter heaven, versus integrating that, these are the ways that we can create heaven right here, right now, and to honor that we are totally miraculously divine beings, but that we're also fucking human, and we're dirty, and we're slutty, and we make mistakes, and we get triggered, and we have to forgive and move forward. And to be able to bring the value back to our humanity is really the message that Mary brings forward.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, my two favorite Jesus quotes, two of my favorite Jesus quotes, I should say. Both of them were illuminated to me by a Jesuit priest who taught Zen. He was this amazing teacher, my favorite teacher in college, Father Wren, R.I.P. At one point he said, "My church is under a rock," which gives you a lot of context for how it was that he believed in God and treated God. And also gives you a lot of context for this giant power hungry, beast of Christianity that is really taking over. And by the way, like, I'm not demonizing all of that. The Catholic Church has done a lot of good in the world, and a lot of bad things, a lot of evil things. And churches, by and large, overall have done same, whatever. The spirit of compassion is great. And there's a lot of good things. It's a mixed bag, but my church is under a rock. And then he also said, I said, you were gods. Like he said to the people, I said, you were gods.
That is the Essene teachings. That's it. That's being able to recognize and remember that we are all divine beings having a human experience. And that's why the
Exactly.
church, I mean, Jesus was the ultimate rebel. Like, if Jesus existed now, he would probably be crucified again, because the church that was created in his name, that has killed in his name, would not accept him, because he rebelled against the state, the law, the church. He rebelled against the establishment, and he really shook things up. And that's why they wanted to get rid of him, was because he was reminding people that they don't need to go through any other, they don't need to make their sacrifices. They don't need to pay their way to heaven. It's a personal relationship that can be present at any
Right.
moment, and reminding people of
Yes.
their divinity. Which is,
Yeah.
that can be intimidating to power structures that capitalize off of people's fear
Yes.
of their own
Exactly.
power,
Exactly. And I think that's also like, I mean, it's a many-fold thing. It consolidates power into one source that they then can claim that they own divinity, and you can only get it by talking to our men. You can only get it by talking to our men. The nuns don't get to preach, even though they did so much good work, like, and continue to do so much good work. Like, so it consolidates power. It also, in terms of like the ego and the human journey, I mean, we're all on this journey. We all are born and then get a mother wound and need validation in our lives, and get a father wound and need, like we all go through this, and we all forget. And it is by some freakish miracle that we're able to have any semblance of remembering in our modern culture. I mean, I feel so lucky that I have drank ayahuasca and have been like on a spiritual path my whole life. Like, I feel so fortunate that like I was raised in that kind of a way, by my mother, and where I grew up, and just continue to seek that. Like, I feel so lucky, but not everybody gets that opportunity. So the point that I'm trying to make is like, the idea that God is separate and I can only get to him through somebody else also serves to just inculcate that whole fear-based operating system, and have people stuck in their weakness, and assign power to other people, and blame other people for their problems, and not take ownership for who they are, and stand in their sovereignty and stand in their power, which is what we need right now. Like, that's what we need. And then, of course, it's so easy once you start to do that journey to just get prideful and then fuck it all up, and think that you're God, or like think that you're God in a way, but that's your that your ego is attached to it, or that you have to save everybody, or any of that. Like, it's perfect the way it is. Anyway, like that whole idea that God can be owned by somebody and given to us through, and only given to us through another, is just, it's so toxic. And I really mean that. It is so toxic. If you want God, my church is under a rock. I said, you are God's. Go put your feet in this dirt. Go do some gardening. Go stir up some soil. Really, like, do some meditation. Do some,
to nature.
Pray. Yeah. So that's what works. I mean, that's what works for me. It's I submit that it works for you. I submit that it works for everybody. The sacrament.
Yeah.
So, wine as the sacrament.
Which is relevant to this conversation, because the first documented miracle that Jesus performed was turning water into wine.
Right. Yeah. That's right. Exactly.
So the wine has a role in this story.
Yes. Turning water into wine. The wine that's in the Bible, or the wine that is spoken of in these ancient stories, is not the Pinot Noir that we get from Napa, even though that's delicious. Too many sulfites for this guy. I got a migraine. Okay, I can't drink it anymore. Sad to say. Used to love that stuff. Now I got to drink French. But it's not the same wine. It was full of psychotropic properties and hallucinogenic ingredients. Um, and that makes way more sense. And, you know, the idea that it is alcohol is the sacrament, given what alcohol does to people. And by the way, I'm not like totally anti alcohol. I drink all the time. I'm drunk right now. No, I'm not. I'm not drunk. I don't drink. I barely drink. I barely drink, but I drink sometimes. Um, and the reason that I only drink sometimes is that I noticed at some point that the effect on me is bad. You know, that it robs me of my power and it gets me stuck in different places and etc. And alcohol, the idea that alcohol, which is, you know, the drug that people are the most violent on, you know, my grandfather was abusive to my grandma. He was only abusive to my grandma when he was drunk. Only when he was drunk. That was the only time. Why is that? Because alcohol is not great for you. It is not a spiritual enlightening drug. It is a numbing drug that doesn't. So the idea that alcohol is the sacrament is just that's preposterous. Whereas if you look at the history of hallucinogenics and you look at ayahuasca wasn't ayahuasca, but it was something similar to that. If you look at mushrooms and the history of mushrooms, well, it was something similar to that too. And I'm sure you probably have some awareness about this. So maybe you could speak to what you think it was.
Okay, yes. And first of all, just want to acknowledge the spirit of alcohol because yes, it has been severely misused. And from what I've been learning, especially in the recent years of our studies, we do an annual pilgrimage down to the high mountains of Colombia, uh, where the Andes meet the Amazon. And we have a community there, the Tiximuyu community, who have been really some of our main teachers over the last few years. And they work with alcohol in a sacred way, in a reverent way, with the fermentation process really being exalted and uplifted and used as a form of medicine and connection to spirit. You know, it's more subtle than some of the stronger psychoactive plants that we work with, for sure. But I do believe that that there's a seat for certain alcohols to be used as a pathway for communion. And
Okay.
we're getting into
Noted.
this important, yeah, just to, just to bring that piece in. But
If it's
obviously,
not
it's the
fully
source of
abused.
major abuse. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, this is it though, right? Like we're abusing tobacco. Tobacco as a master plant, like it's a an amazing guardian, protector, conduit of prayer, and a source of lung cancer for millions because it's being
Yeah.
misused. You know, so this is just an important conversation to bring up around the misuse of sacred tools that maybe start as our medicine but become our poison if they're not used with respect and reverence. So, that being said, we have this conversation that's opening now of the sacred sacrament, which in this context, we're talking about the wine. And it's interesting to track that the story of Yeshua, which I already mentioned, is a mirror to, it's like a fractal of this other story of Isis and Osiris. Well, there's a
Right.
whole nother
Which it is. And if you
mythology.
look at, there's a
Yeah,
lot of
completely it
parallels
is.
there too.
Oh, so
Mm-hmm.
many. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's also a fractal of the cults of Dionysus and this quote religion with no name that is spoken about in one of my favorite books, The Immortality Key, that I highly suggest reading for anyone that's interested in this idea of the psychedelic Eucharist and that essentially the wine that is being spoken
What's it
about
called
here,
again?
you know, the psychedelic Eucharist, it's called,
The
or
psychedelic Eucharist.
the Eucharist, and there's different aspects of it. The Kukion was a version. There's these different sacred brews that have been connected to the origins of religion, and the possibility that actually the story of Jesus is just a spin-off of the story of Dionysus. And
Mm.
Dionysus, or, I think another name for him is Bacchus. He is the god
Bacchus,
of
yes.
celebration and of wine. And within the Dionysian mysteries, and the book, The Immortality Key, goes much deeper into this. There were these priestesses that would create these brews that were essentially sacraments, psychedelic sacraments, or the Eucharist, that would remind people of their divinity, and that would take
Mm-hmm.
people on a profound journey and bring them back to source. As anyone that maybe has had like a good mushroom trip or an ayahuasca journey, how you mentioned, it's like, wow, you really learn a lot in a matter of hours. Like, you can do a lifetime of therapy in one night. And that's what these old cults were practicing, was utilizing the wisdom of master plants to create these brews that redefined our humanity and connected people directly to source. So they were eliminating the need for the establishment of church and religion and the priest as a threshold keeper. They were providing this beverage that directly connected people to source and to their own divinity. And I haven't exactly been able to track down the specific connection between the lineage of Mary's and the Magdalene and Yeshua and Mary and this original sacrament that was the Eucharist or the Kukian. But I just feel like most likely these master teachers were working with master plants, and that it was informing the work that they were doing, and that the sacrament of wine, which is still a practice done today in the form of communion, like there's millions of Christian and Catholics drinking the blood of Christ and eating the bread of his body. It's a metaphor, but I actually believe that it's rooted in these deeply occult traditions of eating the bounty, the manna from heaven, and drinking the psychedelic brew that brought forth their divine nature. And it's kind of like a hilarious joke whenever I witness people. Like, I go to church from time to time, and my family is pretty religious. And when I have witnessed a communion, I'm like, wow, I think they're just participating in like some really pagan shit, and they are not aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to, do you know a Luna Lua? I feel
Yeah,
like
of
you
course.
might know her.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I interviewed her. We did a whole podcast about marijuana and how to treat that, with more honor and more
Mm-hmm.
sacredly. That was the point of talking to her. And she mentioned that, there are people in India who are kind of like, I can't remember what they're called. Sorry, Alona. But
Yeah.
they're basically sort of like secret kind of holy people that are
Yeah.
using marijuana as a sacrament, and that
Mm-hmm.
Jesus would have been exposed to them during his time because they were still doing it back then. And so
Yeah.
that was one of the plants that he was using in order to achieve the enlightenment that he had.
Makes so much
I
sense.
it really does. Now, I don't think that was the wine. I think the wine was probably a hallucinogenic journey, something that like took them into that place that had them, and then they were able to harness it in a way that was really powerful and beautiful, and guide it ritualistically using all these different traditions and things that he learned in India and the East. If you go by the story, um, but yeah, I certainly and I hear what you're saying about alcohol. I guess I'm better about it because I abused it. And so like I see what it cost me in my life, and I see it abused
Yeah.
so frequently in other places. And so then I'm like, and by the way, like there is a world in which one who abuses alcohol then doesn't abuse it anymore. It doesn't have to stop altogether.
Yeah.
That's my case. That's who I
It's a
am.
fine
So
line. It's like The line between medicine and
It is.
madness is razor sharp, and we are constantly walking it.
Right. Exactly. So that's good. Is there anything else about Mary that you think is important to this conversation that we want to get through to people?
Hmm. The only thing I would add is I feel like the presence of her story in these times is a reminder that we don't know what we don't know. And that while it's our nature to want to define reality and, you know, yeah, put things in order, that there is a great, beautiful mystery and so much to always be discovered. And it's important to stay humble, as you said, and to stay curious and to be gentle with ourselves and others, and to recognize that there's a lot more to the story. And I pray that we never figure it all out, because I think the magic of this human experience is the mystery and being able to live in that mystery. And for me, I just feel like she's been a conduit of learning how to find peace in the mystery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's great. That's gorgeous. That's awesome. Okay, cool. How do people find you and what you're like? If people are listening, if ladies are listening, they want to join the Watchtower, they want to check that out. Where do they go? What do they do?
Yeah, probably the best way to connect with me right now is through Instagram. I'm pretty active on that channel. The handle is Lover of the Garden. Roxanne Ruby is my name, and we can link that in the show notes, however you do. We also
Yeah.
have the website, the Magdalene Film, which talks more about the Mary Magdalene Film Project. And I'm really accessible directly, especially on IG. So if you are curious to deepen the conversation and you want to take it further, please reach out. And I love making new relations, new friends within the spirit of this work.
Beautiful. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I ask this of all of
Thank
my
you.
guests.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, I got a question. We're
Okay.
not done. Ready?
Great. Keep it coming.
For you, Roxanne, what is
Mm.
sacred and what is insane?
Mm. For me, what is sacred is the holy waters that flow across this planet and provide us with life, the holy soil that we are fortunate to grow from and be fed from, the fire, which is our source of light and warmth and transformation, and the precious air that we breathe, the inspiration that exists with every inhalation, and the mystery, the spirit, that brings us into encounters like this one that goes beyond explanation and definition, but just really feels like home and sparks a divine recognition. What is insane is the mass amnesia and the forgetfulness of the birthright that we've been given as human beings, as spiritual beings, having this human experience, and just how very blessed we are, and what an opportunity we have to come into relationship with each other, to be in collaboration in this gorgeous creation, and the importance to steward it well so that we can pass on something beautiful and live eternally through our future generations. So just praying that we can continue to remember together.
Yeah, me too. I'm into it. And
Me too.
I feel very confident that we'll never figure out the full mystery of everything.
Oh yeah,
There'll just always be more layers.
exactly.
But yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I really want to acknowledge you for for being a force for good in this world, and also somebody who's really trying to get the story of Mary Magdalene out there and really create a revival around her and what she has to teach us. And I'm really excited about learning more of those mysteries and really seeing what those practices are. I feel very strongly that if Jesus existed and Mary existed, then they had a lot of practices that they were using to get to where they got to, and that those practices will be revealed to us. And some of them we already know, prayer and meditation and looking more deeply, and some of these rites that we spoke of that we don't really know exactly what they are, but we know there's something there. So I'm looking forward to that. So I just thank you for being on this path and being who you are in this world.
A pleasure.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you for
and
having
thank you
me
for being on
and,
Lunacy.
facilitating this conversation. I feel deeply nourished by the words that have been shared here today. I appreciate you.
Beautiful. Yeah, likewise. All right, everybody. If you want to support this podcast, please go to patreon.com/Lunacy podcast. Every little bit helps. If you're interested in doing any sort of sponsorship or partnership, please also let me know. You can get me at info@jeffeido.com. That's info@geoffeido.com. All right. Much love, everybody. See you next time.